What is your favorite cloud pun?
I would say cloudy Mondays are my favorite, right? We always talk about, having our head in the clouds for Mondays, right? And we really look at our cloudy Mondays as our big day of the week in which we drive, what's going to rain for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Welcome. You're listening to the Tech Journal podcast, our companion interview series for the Tech Journal magazine, where business and IT leaders share their experiences to help you accelerate transformation by unlocking the power of people and technology. I'm your host, Jillian Viner. Today's conversation is with Michael Nardone, Director of Services for Modern Cloud and Distinguished Technologist at Insight. If your head is swimming with questions about cloud, Michael is your guy. Michael is obsessed with helping clients achieve business outcomes and deliver real value through modern cloud platforms and accelerated software principles. In his 20-plus years of experience with enterprise technology, Michael has held various roles across deep technical administration, engineering, architecture, and strategy, and he's helped a client or two get out of a cloud lurch. As a lifelong learner, Michael genuinely enjoys the rapid pace of technology and keeps up with all the cloud trends. All right, let's do this. We did a report called The Path to Digital Transformation, really looking at where IT leaders stand in 2024. Lots of interesting data in that. I'm going to sprinkle in, cloud pun, some of those data points throughout our conversations today. And I want to start with this one. Only 2% of organizations are not using multiple clouds today or don't have plans to in this year. Does that stat surprise you? Does that feel right that 98% of companies are already using more than one cloud?
Really, I mean, our view is multi-cloud is the new normal, right? And so that is a little higher than I thought, but most statistics you'll see are 80 to 90% customers are using a multi-cloud environment and enjoying a multi-cloud strategy. And when you think about the richness and business capability across, so many different SaaS providers that I'm sure we'll talk through a little bit more, it's just the modern way in which we do business. It is truly the new normal, and so the stat, although high, isn't shocking, right? When you live in the industry, as long as I have, you begin to see these huge trends that have emerged, right? And things have only been accelerated here recently. So, yeah, is it a big number? It is, and that last 2% we may never capture, but this is just about the full addressable market has more than one cloud at this point.
Is there anybody that's really wondering right now, is it time to go multi-cloud? It sounds like that truly is the norm. Everyone's there.
It truly is, right? But there are different levels of sophistication, right? When we talk about multi-cloud, we really like to say, you can have multiple clouds, but it doesn't mean you're multi-cloud, right? When we think about being sophisticated with multi-cloud means, do I have interoperability and portability of my workloads across clouds? Do I have, runtimes that enable me to reach my customers at the point of business or at the point of which I provide care or the point of sale or point of transaction? So those are, again, we look at, just because you have multiple clouds doesn't mean that you're at that level of sophistication. So out of that 98%, though, we know there's a much smaller demographic that is truly, truly mature in using multiple clouds to that multi-cloud phase and really taking advantage of all their investments across those clouds.
That makes me think back to a conversation I had with Juan Orlandini a while ago, and he actually said that in some of his conversations with clients, sometimes there's sort of an aha moment where they don't even realize that they're using multiple clouds. Do you see that happen where sort of this cloud sprawl, if you will, occurs and clients aren't aware or don't have that visibility over their cloud consumption?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think one of my favorite examples is that, I was working with a customer and, hey, we're only using Microsoft Azure today. And so we actually had that conversation on a Teams chat, messaging their teams over Slack while we were reviewing and analyzing things around Salesforce, right? And it was, hey, you may only be having one hosting provider for your cloud consumption and compute today, but look at how many clouds are powering your business today that are integral to your business processes. So it ends up being a wake-up call and that aha moment of, oh my goodness, I have more clouds under my care, custody, and control than I actually realized, right? Because we become so focused on where am I deriving my compute from, but we don't realize how many other business processes are circling around us, right, and are already in place.
Very interconnected, very ancestral in the cloud world, it sounds like. So talk to me about like the strategy with going multiple clouds, especially if it seems to be happening almost organically. How do you do that very thoughtfully?
Yeah, so when we think about going multiple clouds, right, we really say it starts with success and kind of mastery, or at least proficiency in a single cloud, right? And so as you become, pretty ingrained with one, it becomes part of your DNA, right? This is how we deploy and build applications. This is how we execute our analytics and data work uh, cases, right? Um, as you begin to build up those muscles right around one, right, you'll generally look at adding another cloud, right? It could be inorganically, right? Maybe you're making a merger and acquisition, right? And you're, the company that you acquire or merging with uses a completely separate set of providers, right? It also can be for differentiating features, right? And so we look at it as there are really large trends in terms of industry specific services, right, across providers. And so after you've got that proficiency in one, you look and say, you know what, there are some really amazing capabilities and value added services for the industry in which I conduct my business in. And we want to take advantage of those, right? We want to be able to add those on. And so that's where we see that next cloud added. And then, we'll see maybe even that, secondary and then tertiary cloud provided. Again, certain clouds, they all have kind of the lowest common denominator across compute, but there are pretty rich services across the clouds. Or maybe you're trying to, provide geographic reach that is better served with one hyperscale provider over the other. And so when you look at it from that journey, you've been able to iterate, create business value, create demand for those cloud assets, right? And then you'll get to this very, kind of robust place across multi-cloud because you've scaled right? You've brought minimally viable production, and you've grown from what was, that initial cloud investment into, a pretty amazing set of multi-cloud capabilities for your business. But again, if you try to start at multi-cloud, if you try to take the complexity on of saying, I'm going to adopt 3 hyperscalers out of the gate, you generally don't build the organizational muscle. You don't have the process. You don't have the decision making and frameworks and strategy in place if you try to adopt them all at once. So again, that's why we highly advocate and see success across, start small, iterate, create value, and then that's where you're going to realize value across multiple providers.
Let's talk more about that because understanding the benefits of the clouds, I mean, it sounds like not all clouds are created equal, to put it simply, and trying to find the best clouds for your specific use cases. What are the benefits of multi-cloud that appeal most to IT leaders specifically? What are they looking at when you're looking at cloud options?
Yeah, when we think about executive leadership, there are a few things that are very much top of mind, right? We talked about those differentiating services by industry, right? A great client example, we had one of the hyperscale providers that, had AI language services, right, that were very specific for specific dialects in the U.S. state in which they were in. And that was a value add and very much differentiating capability, right? So we do see that across industry verticals, right? Things like healthcare data engine, fleet-wide IoT, right, for transportation and logistics, right? And so there really are defining and differentiating services, right? But what we also see is geopolitical reach, right? There are certain regions in which maybe one provider has a bigger point of presence, or they have more local regulations covered for you that it makes sense there. We also see a huge impetus to avoid vendor lock-in, right? There are maybe open source things for, we'll talk large language models, right? There are open source models that you may want access to that are better served within one provider over the next. And so that aspect of avoiding lock-in, right, and providing agnosticity and some flexibility is generally top of mind, for many folks when it comes to adopting multi-cloud. As we said, there are different regulatory and compliance pieces that can drive that aspect as well.
Are the reasons or the benefits for this different from an IT leader's perspective than, say, a CEO or a CFO?
They are, right. So if I think about an IT leader, right, one of the other main talking points for multi-cloud is the resiliency, right? We've had some major global systems outages here as of late, right? And I think we're all really well aware of those, right? And so as an IT leader, you're looking to build reliability, resiliency into your systems. Multi-cloud strategy very much complements that. And so that's really where we can see a CIO, a CTO really resonate with the CFO and CEO, right? Being able to equate that to business terms, right? Hey, listen, this outage due to, again, I think we're all pretty familiar with the most recent one here. Um, this is how many billions of dollars in revenue were lost because of that, right? Like, what were the impacts to our business? And so, from an IT perspective, we're looking very deep at resilient architectures, building in redundancy, right? Building in these amazing runtimes across multi-cloud environments, right? But when we want to bridge that gap between our executives and technology into maybe our business leaders, our CTOs or our CFOs or our CROs, right? How can we equate it in terms of business term, right? Because we can take those very much bits and bytes and, the compute of the cloud, but how do we translate it into a language that they're going to understand? So that's where I see where we can really do a better job as technologists. And I think we are doing that, right? You look at the modern CIOs, they speak the language of business as well or better than they speak the language of technology.
I'm going to press you on that a little bit because I feel like that resiliency is something that's obviously top of mind for everybody right now. So how would a multi-cloud strategy help you in a scenario where your data is currently with one vendor and an exterior force, something out of your control happens? What do you do in that moment? How does a multi-cloud help you get out of that hostage situation?
Yeah, so certainly from what you described, data has its own gravity, right? So when we say it has its own gravity, it's going to pull applications, it's going to pull workloads, it's going to pull traffic closer to it. And when we think about multi-cloud, that is your ability to run your specific, we'll call them mission critical, business critical applications in more than one hyperscale provider, right? So even an event that could take down one hyperscale provider, is my business resilient enough to execute and run on another hyperscale provider, right? When it comes to data, there are a ton of new companies out there that give you the modern cloud distributed data warehouse, right? I'll name a couple of them because they're, really huge partners with us here at Insight, but companies like Databricks, companies like Snowflake, right, have really built their entire business model platform on being able to run distributed data use cases, right, across multiple hyperscalers, right? So even though data is its own gravity, it's generally the hardest thing to overcome for what we'll call switching cost, egress cost, right, to multi-cloud, right? It's kind of an almost barrier there for multi-cloud adoption. We do see a lot of new technologies that have come up, a lot of big technology stacks partners that we have that help us overcome that. But from that true resiliency perspective, right, you think about a hyperscale provider gives you all these amazing tools to say secure, resilient, but again, we've seen can be global events, cybersecurity attacks, up to natural disasters that could take you offline with a single hyperscale provider. And having that redundancy and resiliency to be able to have your business survive and thrive is a huge benchmark of multi-cloud maturity and something we absolutely look for, right? Being able to fail over within a provider is amazing, but being able to do it across cloud providers is what we would call the hallmark and even that next level of maturity that many clients are driving towards.
Yeah, it's interesting. The other side of that story is that, again, I'm pulling another stat from that report, 56% of the IT decision makers that we surveyed cited that security challenges with multi-cloud was a concern that they have with a multi-cloud approach. So how do you sort of balance the resiliency story with the security story? What's the risk there with security? What are their concerns?
Yeah, so I mean, we view security as table stakes, right? No one ever selects, I'll take the insecure option for my multi-cloud environment, right?
Why not? It's not going to happen to me.
And so, again, when we look at that 56%, yeah, security is a challenge, right? There are new classes of tools. There's, equipping and uplifting your workforce, right? There's a whole set of new kind of acronyms, right, that have come out from a tool perspective. Things like Cloud Workload Protection Platform, CWPPs, CNAPP, Cloud Native App Protection Platforms, Cloud Security Posture Management, CSPM, right? And so we've got all these new class of tools that have emerged that we have to become proficient in. They have to become, again, part of who we are from our, cybersecurity threat detection and response through our security architectures, right? Secure by design. And so there's complexity and a learning curve with a single cloud. And now when we go multi-cloud, where the challenge comes in is that a good multi-cloud security strategy is built off of the native controls within an individual provider's platform, right? So, for instance, Azure would have something like network security groups, and then we have application security groups, and then on the AWS side, we have things like our VPCs and our deep network security over there, right? And network ACLs, right? And it's not that we want to get bogged down in the acronym soup, but those are very much native control structures that are unique under the hood to those platforms, right? And so where we see a lot of challenges on the security side is if you try to make all the clouds the same, right? So good multi-cloud security is built off of a unified control plane, visibility and control across the clouds, but don't unmoor yourself from the native protection platforms and the native pieces that the providers have. And the nice part is we are seeing new class of tools and capabilities that allow you to go deep within the provider's technology stack and security stack, but have that kind of unique, ubiquitous view across them, right? Again, I can talk of a few that we have here, like Palo Alto Prisma Cloud. Wiz.io is certainly one of the best security runbook policy governance for multi-cloud, all built off deep discipline with each one cloud. So hearing 56%, not a surprise, right? We've got lots of people, process, and technology to uplift to keep ourselves secure and keeping pace with cloud, right? Some of our old security models, I think of castle and moat of the data center, right? In cloud, we've moved the security control plane largely from the network layer into the identity layer, right? And all of those things compound to say, boy, we've got to think about security in a new way with new class of tools, with new skills in our people.
I'm not going to lie to you. It sounds a little overwhelming. And I know I'm not the only one.
There are a lot of acronyms in there, for sure.
There are. This was a really nice tease-in because the other stats I wanted to throw your way was that 52% say that their second highest concern below security was about the increased complexity. And that was pretty closely followed by 42% who say that their challenges are in training and hiring the right talent to manage additional cloud management tools. And just by your description of the security elements, it sounds like those are very real pain points. So for companies or leaders who are looking to, move their multi-cloud strategy along, facing those challenges, what do you do? How do you solve for those pain points?
Well, again, our mantra is we start small, we design small, we incubate from minimally viable production and enhance and extend and iterate over time, right? So we think about public cloud, right? And really, cloud computing paradigm in general is everything software defined, right? So there are some amazing software engineering practices that we want to apply to how we adopt cloud, right? So that's the ability to, start with the core tenets of what we need and radiate out, right? If you try to duplicate 20, 30 years of data center maturity and capability into the cloud day one, you're going to have a very much uphill battle, right? Your staff, your teams, they're not going to be able to get that right out of the gate. So we need to start small. We need to incubate. We need to have a measured approach to this and a strategy around it. The other piece when we think about complexity is that, public cloud hyperscalers give you, again, a huge set of tools and services. When you build with a multi-cloud strategy in mind, you're going to, again, we started off with 98% are multi-cloud today, right? When you understand that it's going to drive different technology decisions, right? You're going to bring in abstracted runtimes, right? One that comes immediately to mind as we think about, how much Kubernetes has proliferated, our ability to have a consistent runtime across cloud providers for multi-cloud at the edge, at the point of sale, at the point of where we do business, right? In hybrid topologies, right? And so we think about that. We need to make technology decisions that are more ubiquitous and that give us reuse and modularity, right? And so, yes, there is a degree of complexity, but we can combat that by normalizing and abstracting away that complexity. So that needs to drive a lot of our technology decisions, our architectures, our patterns, kind of our procured topologies and validated designs. And that's what's going to let us go fast with multi-cloud, right? Think about it. Jillian, if you're an application developer, you're looking for a pretty robust event and messaging pattern, right? Having to build that from scratch, have all that cognitive load on you and your team to figure out, okay, I need this service in Azure. Maybe I need this one in AWS. There's this amazing, API management in Google, right? How do I put all those things together, right? And so that is a lot of complexity. What we want to do, though, is abstract that complexity with, well-defined cloud centers of excellence, right? An ability to say, okay, we know it's going to be complex, but how can we reduce that complexity? How can we build in, acknowledge the complexity, but rather than run from it, embrace it and say, listen, this is the right pattern that we need to deploy. These are the right technologies that are going to help us be repeatable, reusable, and then cut through that complexity. I will tell you though, if you go in without a strategy, if you go in without an eye towards the fact that you need to be multi-cloud aware, you can find yourself very quickly in the deep end of the pool, right, where you're overwhelmed by the complexity. So again, that's why we have those kind of measured steps to get there, those technology choices. And if you do that, we think you can navigate the multi-cloud waters pretty well.
Have you been thrown into those deep waters before?
Oh yes, yeah, yeah, very much. You come in and you look at it and you say, hey, in some simple questions, right? Hey, which is your preferred provider, right? Well, it's kind of, you get your own choice. Oh, and so you'll notice that organizations, even though the technology is complex, you'll see that they're bogged down in decision making, right? So we lack a framework to say, if we're using this use case, if this is a data analytics use case, it goes here. Right? Maybe Google's my preferred provider there. I've got business applications. Maybe I am automating business process management and I love Power Apps on the Azure platform. We should have a very clear path and well-defined patterns that are automated, repeatable to get us there, right? So when we go into the deep end, we almost always find that those key elements are missing, right? Oh, do you have a framework? Do you have a decision and analysis posture, right, for which provider you choose for which use cases? Do you have dispositions of your portfolio today? Do you have goals for how much compute you would like to derive from your multi-cloud strategy? And what we find, we're in the deep end, a lot of those artifacts, a lot of that upfront adoption framework and estate rationalization just hasn't occurred, right? So we certainly help folks out when they find themselves in that deep end of the pool. But almost always we find that a lot of those kind of foundational elements and those centers of excellence in kind of those North Stars for multi-cloud adoption, simply aren't in place, right? We grew fast, we grew organically, and we find ourselves one day going, oh my goodness, the bills are more expensive than I thought. I don't have the visibility and control that my CISO and security needs. Can you help us?
Let's talk about those bills. You mentioned earlier data egress, and when you're talking about multi-clouds, you're like, that's likely to happen. How do you go through a multi-cloud strategy, or how do you control multi-clouds and predict and control those costs?
Yeah, so what's been really nice is an entire, what we'll call practice methodology has been developed called FinOps, right? It's really a play on what we call DevOps, right? Which was designed to break down a lot of the frictions and silos between development and classic IT operations. And FinOps is the same way.
Financial ops.
Yes, correct. Yep. And as I said, we love our acronyms in technology. We love to truncate and shorten words. But when we think about, FinOps and especially as it relates to cloud, is the fact that it's the collaboration between not only IT, but also our business units and finance, right? So giving that chief financial officer in the office of the CFO a seat at the table when it comes to making cloud financial decisions. The other reality is that, many folks, when it comes to IT procurement, have always been fixed capital expense, right? I'm going to buy hardware and software assets. I'm going to depreciate those within my data center. And now suddenly we go to the cloud. It's this consumption-based model. It looks more like I'm buying time with a utility than I am my classic multi-year budgetary cycle for IT. And so that really stresses a lot of our procurement, our supplier management, and how we forecast and budget for IT cost, right? That annual model, when you're trying to go fast and work in dynamic cloud environments, can be heavily, heavily stressed, right? And so that's where FinOps comes in, right? Giving us visibility. I mean, at the heart of it, how can I link business initiatives to my IT spend in cloud, right? That's a huge portion of it, right? And then how do I optimize those costs over time? And so we think about multi-cloud, right? Listen, it has been complex, right? Because there have been different standards, different data standards across public cloud providers. So maybe something that worked really well in one, you try to apply that to the other, and oh my goodness, it's a whole other set of tools. The costs look different. I can't equate them apples to apples. And it's been a challenge over time, right, where you had to have deep discipline. One of the nice things that's come out of the FinOps consortium has been the new focus standard. So how do we normalize cost data, consumption data across public cloud hyperscalers. So that's actually broken way to us really in the past year or so. And it's given us this great ability to normalize data and give us more apples to apples. The other really cool part of that is now that we have more normalized cost, right, and a better way to compare, it lets us broker some of that compute. Hey, you know what? It may be cheaper in provider A over provider B. Have we considered and are we mature enough to run the workload there? So yes, the cost can be a shock, but with a disciplined approach and with some of those right FinOps services around the environment, some of the tools there, looking across multi-cloud, and some of the really key enhancements like that focus specification I talked about are what let you achieve what I would call cost optimization in a multi-cloud world.
Love it. There's hope at the end of the rainbow.
There is, yeah.
I got to throw in more weather puns.
Sugarcoat it that it's easy to get there, right. But I'm encouraged that the tools are becoming in place, that we're agreeing on. Getting everyone to agree on a data specification is huge when it comes to IT standards and driving those things. So yes, it's been hard. It's still a challenge. I'm not gonna make it sound easier than it is. But we are now getting the tools and momentum that we need to let you get a handle on those costs and optimize them.
Michael, I can't end our conversation today without asking you what AI is doing to multi-cloud strategies. What is the impact there?
So, again, as we know, Gen AI is driving huge demand for compute, right? So when we think about multi-cloud, we've looked at global supply chain shortages, right? So there was a time where we looked, can I train my models in another provider that maybe has more, NVIDIA H100s available at this time, where they have the right consumption model for different computes and capacity. So we've seen a huge demand, right? You look at the compound annual growth of cloud computing. It has grown even greater than it has in the past with updated forecasts around it, simply because Gen AI is just demanding more compute resources, right? Training models is computationally compute. We've seen new class of services like model as a service, right? And what is really cool for me is the fact that the cloud computing paradigm, right, in terms of just that consume, pay as you go in certain models, right, lends itself so well to Gen AI, right? You think about Gen AI, if I'm going to train a model, you generally don't need to purchase and have that compute resident, right? So cloud computing, being able to spin up, get my training results across my data is huge for what we see in public cloud. The other thing I really want to point out, right, when we think about, I talked about things like IoT and edge scenarios, right? I talked a little bit about Kubernetes, right? Gen AI runs best on Kubernetes, right? We've seen things like DGX Cloud, NGC from NVIDIA, all across Kubernetes, right? Most modern models are there, but we also have this new class of what we call RAGs, or retrieval augmented generation, right? And so these are really intelligent agents that are closer to where you conduct business, and they're also doing the inference side, right? Not that we're having a deep Gen AI talk today, right? We have tons of those I hope that folks will avail themselves of. But the reality is that the cloud computing paradigm of I have centralized control and management, and I'm able to push down rich services to the edge or the point in which you do business, that is a huge part of the Gen AI paradigm, right? Is we run inference right closer to where the data is being generated, closer to where the use case is at. And then when we think about pushing RAGs out in these intelligent agents from everything from AI-powered PCs, right? Tons of new offerings from Intel, AMD, the biggest chip makers. That's where cloud lends itself so well, because cloud has always been built with this globally scalable, rich way to reach different geopolitical zones across the globe. And when we think about the best AI use cases, the best AI-enabled applications, that's where cloud just really fits itself so well to that. Not only can I train and scale rapidly, but can I push inference and can I push those intelligent agents to the edge? Because again, it's been built into how we think about cloud. And it's also built into a lot of the technology decisions that I talked about earlier of, hey, if you want to be successful at multi-cloud, build in things like portability, build in your software supply chains. Those things resonate extremely well with Gen AI use cases and have become really the de facto and preferred runtime for Gen AI. So they go together, as you can see, extremely well, and very complementary strategies, right? When it comes to, boy, this model just seems to either run better or have more investment on this provider. Multi-cloud's giving you that absolute flexibility to do so.
The sky's the limit. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a really great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the time today, Jillian.
Thank you again to Michael Nardone, Director of Services for Modern Cloud and Distinguished Technologist at Insight. For more insights from today's conversation about multi-cloud, visit insight.com/techjournal. This podcast is brought to you by Insight Enterprises, A Fortune 500 solutions integrator with 16,700 teammates worldwide, Insight helps organizations accelerate their digital journey to modernize their business and maximize the value of technology. We enable secure end-to-end transformation and meet the needs of our clients through a comprehensive portfolio of solutions, far-reaching partnerships, and 35-plus years of broad IT expertise. For more information, visit insight.com.